right, in a way that would not impede the science. So what they tried to do was understand the science to know what it was we needed to be able to do to move stem cell technology forward as rapidly as possible without creating any ethical barriers that were going to be too hard for many of the citizens to swallow. And I was very impressed with how diligently they worked at that. Sean Keeley, who was here in front, was one of the staff members who did that, and Richard Powell and Joshua Princeman, who's not with us today, right? And so the senator is to be commended for the staff that she's amassed. And I just thought it would be wonderful if you could hear a little bit from her about what it was like to get that bill through and how indebted we are to her now for having done that for us. And she's got some plans, I think, for Massachusetts stem cell research in the future that she may share with us a little bit today. Now, Senator Creem is a Brookline native. She is a practicing attorney, and she is a very active senator. And she's introduced a number of really interesting bills, including the stem cell bill, which I know occupied a fair amount of her staff's time last year. So, and if you would like to tell us a little bit more about what your particular political interests are, that would be great. But it's my great pleasure to introduce Senator Cynthia Creem from Brookline.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and if there are any constituents, I did begin in Brookline, and I live in Newton now. So I want to thank you very much, Anne. And Anne mentioned how much fun it was to work on this bill. It wasn't fun learning these terms. Sean Keeley is my legal staff, probably one of the brightest people I've met. He took a little while to learn it, getting me to learn it. I didn't think it was fun, but I will say that I was amazed at how much I was able to learn to even not really fall asleep during this presentation and understand the impact that I think this presentation had on the ethical questions that people are concerned about in whether they're going to support therapeutic or reproductive cloning. So it was very interesting. So just a little bit of background of how I got involved in this. I guess I got involved in from a lot of different ways. I do practice law. I practice family law. So I'm involved in the kind of work, not just divorce, but custody and issues with regard to there's an egg and who pays child support and who claims the egg and those kinds of overall issues, which at least brought me into some understanding. And just a quick aside, my son is a lawyer, and he was at Boston College Law School living home taking property law. And I thought I remembered this biggest case, I don't know many lawyers here, but it was Pearson versus Post. It involved foxes running across property, who owned the property, who belonged there. And I thought I'd really show him up. And I said, he's a first-year student. So Gary, you've been in property for 2 months, and have you learned Pearson versus Post? He said, what? We're learning who owns an egg in a fertility clinic. I never learned that in law school. And so I realized that really the world is moving in that direction. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I filed a bill, and I actually filed a bill because I was interested in cord blood banking. My daughter had a baby and wasn't aware that she could bank the baby, the placenta blood, and for the first child. And I thought everybody should become aware of that. And she did it with the second, and I know that Sean did that. And I filed a bill with the hopes that people would recognize that as important, make that information available to people, and we would start a dialogue. And with that was the first stem cell bill. And of course, that bill went and passed in the Senate, didn't pass in the whole legislature, and like everything else, it takes time. And the second time around, it did. But the second time around, I think we admittedly spent a lot more time trying to understand, and we had more scientists at the State House. And we had some scientists that were on various different sides. They weren't all taking the same road, and some who were more concerned what ethical problems were we dealing with, but a concern that the legislatures understand the differences. And for me, it was so hard to understand, particularly whether we were going to be talking about a fertilized egg or an egg that wasn't fertilized, and nuclear transfer and where we went from there. But we had a statute in Massachusetts up until the time we just changed it. Some people think we legalized stem cell work. Well, here's what it was before we changed the law, for those that, particularly those scientists that don't know. Our law said that if you wanted to work on fetal tissue, and you had to get permission from the district attorney to do that, because it would have criminal penalties if you didn't get permission from the district attorney. I think that statute had been on the books for a long time, but it probably came about when we started to talk about abortion issues. And the statute spoke about fetuses. But buried in the statute was a line that said, for the purposes of this statute, an embryo is a fetus. So when scientists consulted with their attorneys, you know, we attorneys have to really look the law over, they were told, you can't take a chance. The law is not clear. You need to get permission. So some research was taking place at Harvard. They got permission from the district attorney, Martha Coakley. What did they do? They spent a lot of money. They hired a scientist, and they used the criteria that the undifferentiated cells had no human characteristics. Now, they were dealing with a district attorney who was open-minded, who was not, who was and is pro-choice, who didn't get too involved in worrying about whether this was life. And she agreed that the work would be done. So they paid more money. They did convince her. The work went through. But there were other groups of people in other areas in the state that wanted to do some research. They had to appeal to a district attorney that wasn't going to have the same end result as District Attorney Coakley. Their feelings were different. They didn't understand it. And people who didn't understand it really began to think this is a life. They didn't understand these are undifferentiated cells. They didn't want to understand these issues. So we had seven different kinds of criteria. Some people could work and some couldn't. And some had strict penalties. And overall, the scientists were having to spend more money to stay in Massachusetts than they'd had to elsewhere. And you know, we've been suffering a recession. So besides all the good scientific reasons that we want to have stem cell, the reasons that we want to someday save people from dying from so many things, there's also a financial impact. There's an economic impact. Cultivating this scientific community in Massachusetts is very good and healthy for Massachusetts. We used to have manufacturing. We don't. We have financial services, and we have now, I would say now, the life sciences are, and there are statistics that show there are more businesses being conducted by life scientists than any other kind of business here in Massachusetts. And we wanted to cultivate that and keep it. And we wanted to say, you don't have to go to California, you don't have to go to New Jersey. You should be here in Massachusetts. We want to make it easier for you. That was the mission, but the issue was to convince people. And I think that most people ultimately wanted to see stem cell work, but they were hung up on the issues, the ethical issues. Are we going to be doing human cloning? Interestingly, with all our statutes, we had no statutes that prevented human cloning until we just did this one. So if you had wanted to do that and have Dolly here or whatever, you would have been able to do that. I was at a dinner a few nights ago with some people who were interested in stem cell, and there were many people there. The person that was sitting next to me is an attorney from Florida, and he was the first attorney that brought the action against the Raelians. Do you remember the issue of the Raelians? He didn't believe there was a child cloned, and he went and filed a petition for guardianship, and he brought the whole thing out into the public. It was very interesting, and that sort of brought the whole thing to head. So the debate became complicated, and I was so lucky not only to have Sean, but that Anne spent so much time trying to give us information. And we got to the point where we thought everybody understood the law well enough that we had the votes There were some people who felt their religious motivations could not get them over that hurdle. And partly, I think it was a not understanding, but they couldn't vote for it. But we had enough, we were fine, we were ready to vote when everything almost fell apart. Some women who view the issue of producing eggs in a way, they were concerned what would happen, that women were being taken advantage of by the necessity of having hormones and of when we cultivate the eggs, where do they come from, and that the women were being taken advantage of. So that started to linger in the Senate, and there was some concern about how do you deal with that issue. When I wrote the bill, I was very adamant that we not pay women for the eggs, other than their expenses, but that we not begin to have a cottage industry for taking advantage of people who financially needed money and would be doing this. You would be giving them hormones. I felt that it was the right thing to do to not pay them. There were some women in the legislature who felt differently, and they thought that women who needed money should have that opportunity. Ann was great. I talked to Ann about those issues. Ann came down to the State House again and again. I'm worried. You don't live in Newton. You're not running for the Senate, right? Ann came down and worked with us, made some explanations to us. We ended up in the bill saying we would make a study of whether we do need to do something about paying people beyond their expenses. But so far, we haven't. It's still being studied. And we had a concern, and I know Ann and I talked about it, that in our regulation, we would put some regulations on fertility clinics that we had not wanted to do, and that would be an inadvertent outcome of the legislation. I think it wasn't, but it was a concern. And particularly all of these things happen when you don't have enough information, is what I think. So that was that legislation, and we did it. We're very happy. Passed the Senate, gets vetoed by the governor, but we had enough votes to override the governor's veto, and that is the law of Massachusetts now. Yesterday, we did something else. The Massachusetts Senate took another step, I think, in the right direction. Now, just as a little lesson, the Senate votes and the House vote, but they both have to vote to have a bill ultimately passed. Then the governor has an opportunity, and then we can veto. So what we did yesterday only occurred in the Senate. It has to happen in the House, and the governor has to support it. So don't go out and think all this money's already there. But the Senate took the first step, and they had an economic stimulus bill, and they plan on investing more than $75 million to spur development in the life sciences and technology. This isn't all stem cell, but this is what they're doing. And the centerpiece of the investment is the creation of a life science center that would attract some private funding, provide financing to life science initiatives, and coordinate all life science activities in the Commonwealth. And it would receive $10 million a year in state funds for the first several years, so that it can immediately give research grants, scholarships, and invest in biomedical research, which obviously would be important to everyone here. I amended the bill, and I was very happy that I could do that, so that this center would be required to explore the feasibility of two of my priorities. One would be the establishment of a lab space around the state that is independent of federal funds and could be used for stem cell research. One concern, and we needed to amend the statute, is that we wouldn't be giving money out to organizations or institutions that would be taking NIH funds, prohibiting them from doing the same things that we agreed they could do now. And the second was to establish and maintain a genetic material bank here in the Commonwealth for the benefit of the research in Massachusetts. I don't know if that'll happen. We couldn't get an agreement that it would happen right now. What we got was an agreement that the center would look into the feasibility of this. I know there's talk about an egg bank. We'd love to have it here in Massachusetts. I'd be happy to work on whatever we thought we might be able to do to try and get that here. Now, that was a good first step. We're still trying to do more. We just filed a bill which we had hoped would be in that economic stimulus plan which would create new tax incentives, both personal deductions and corporate tax credit for donations to the new Life Science Center. And that, we think, would stimulate more people, adding, in addition to the public funds, there would be private funds. The plan, we hope, will direct an additional $100 million to biomedical research over the next 5 years. It hasn't been passed yet, so don't go out and think it's there. This is the part that we just filed. And we think the issue is so important. We don't want the issue to stop with having us pass that law. We need to do what we can do. And while you people work so hard on trying to find us ways to do it, ways that we might not all understand, we need to work together, because it's not going to happen unless we work out the political problems, we get ways for people to contribute financially, and we all work together to make this happen in the end. So I was happy to be part of that process. I want to thank you, Anne, for asking me to come, and for Sean to come today to join you. And I hope that we can continue to work to raise money and ultimately do all the good things that we want to do. So thank you very much. All right.
Can you stay for lunch?
It's
up to you. Or you can have a snack?
Sure, but we can maybe stay for a little bit.
Okay. Does anybody have any specific questions of the senator? I mean, how often do we get to talk to somebody who's working on our behalf down at the State House? Are there any specific, Carol?
Yes, where do you envision this Life Science Center will be located?
There was some issues with Lowell and Worcester were two of the areas that they were talking about that. Now again, this has to be concurred by the House, and the House may have a whole, ultimately I can tell you that even if it ends up being passed, it will change, it will somehow change. But we talked about some work that was being done in Lowell and perhaps in Worcester.
So it would be under the auspices of the University of Massachusetts?
The Worcester, go ahead, Sean.
The president of UMass would be one of the 3 directors of this new Life Sciences Center. So I would imagine there will be some cooperation between the university system and this new center. But I think in marked contrast to other states that are looking at this, we're not concerning ourselves so much with a bricks and mortar plan and saying, oh, this is our new Life Sciences Center, here's our beautiful building, but rather trying to get the money out there as quickly as possible as far as grants and especially another thing that we've been pushing is for endowed chairs at various universities to try and step up the undergrad and graduate learning.
We're far off from groundbreaking.
That's right.
But I mean, it like everything else, it takes a while, and this is a beginning. But
I mean, one of the things that's been interesting about the California initiative is that what they're doing is setting up an administrative structure that's completely independent of federal funding. And I think that's one of the points here, is to try to set up a structure that is so independent of federal funding that you don't run into any of the NIH clashes that Northeastern's going through right now.
or if I can say something political, change the administration. Starting with the corner office.
Are there any other questions, comments? Eric?
Yeah, what's the time frame for the economic stimulus package, and what can folks in this audience do to help?
Spoken like a department chair.
I think that what you can do is try and contact Speaker DeMacy and see if we can get some concurrence with the House. It becomes very competitive. The time frame, I doubt that it's good. Our session ends November 16th until January 1st. I think the Speaker is well into trying to get a health plan passed before that. I think the Senate is reluctant to get the health plan passed because they feel they haven't had enough time, or that they initiated it earlier and they didn't concur. So I don't think it's something that will probably happen before the session ends, but certainly by the beginning of the year, working with the Speaker would be very important. I think the Senate President realizes, and I'm hoping that we can meet with him on the bank, on the genetic bank, But with regard to the economic stimulus plan, I think working with the speaker would be a good idea. Yes.
I'm interested in this question of payment for donors and these two conflicting ethical issues.
For the women, you mean?
Women,
Yes.
yes. On the one hand, the ethical question of is it commodification of eggs if you can buy and sell them? On the other hand, isn't it the woman's right to do what she wants with her own eggs? How are you going to forward this debate?
Well, I had my own feelings, obviously, which
We
is
all-
why
we
I
all do.
filed the bill
Mm.
initially,
Mm.
and I thought that if you're a purist and believes that a woman has the right to do whatever she wants with her eggs, you don't necessarily have to pay her, because that means if she's not being paid, she has the right to not do it. So I don't know if the two things are linked together. I think the woman should have the right, and I've always felt strongly. I felt personally that when you raise the bar in how much you paid, you would take and put many women who were not as well educated, who didn't understand the implications of all the hormone treatments, in a position, or young, in a position to say, this is a quick buck. I'm going to do it. We know about women's bodies and how they've been taken advantage of or used or whatever. And so I felt strongly that we shouldn't. The reason I gave some thought to it is that there were several of the minority women in the legislature who were not only minorities but came from districts which the socioeconomic level was lower, people needed it. They thought that this incidentally would be a good thing to do to help those women. My focus is not really, I don't think this should be the vehicle to help those women. I think there are other vehicles that we can. But we had a committee, and if in fact they come back strongly, I think most people were convinced that we should not be making this a cottage industry. And that is my position, and I hope to advance that.
The committee will report when?
I don't know the time frame.
There was no
I don't know if
end
there was
date to it.
It's part of the committee that's going to be set up to oversee this and then come back. So if they don't report, we're still in a position that they don't pay them for more. So it may be good not to have a quick report.
Yeah, I'd like a legal clarification. It's my understanding that you're not allowed to traffic in human body parts. Like you can't sell your own kidney for $50,000. So why should you be able to sell your own eggs?
Well, it's not a law. I mean, if you believe that a woman owns that egg, and I mean, that
My
goes back
question
into
is
the
about your
ethical.
Am I right that you're not allowed to sell your kidney?
I think
That's tricky.
that, yeah,
Yes.
I think that's tricky. I think the issue, this is kind of a broad area of law. We've had the courts dealing with, when they talk about who owns the egg, we had that issue on a child support. A woman called a fertility clinic after she was divorced and asked for the egg and had
Yeah,
the
I
egg,
remember that.
okay,
Yeah.
and she had a child because she believed that that was her egg. I think it was her egg before it was fertilized. I
Yeah.
think that's it. We have to consider there are eggs until they get fertilized, and then we don't own them all. That was a fertilized egg. And she did not tell the father of that child, and she went and she had the egg put in, and she had a child. And then she sued for child support because, sounds pretty cool. The court said that she had done that without his agreement, without talking with him, and the court took a position that she couldn't get child support. I didn't say she couldn't have taken the egg, but I don't know. I don't think there's any clear law about that. I think people feel strongly that they shouldn't get paid for them. We used to have people pay a lot of money to adopt children, so that people who were giving up their children might do it for money. And we changed that, and we made it much stricter in Massachusetts, only expenses. some expense. But there are people that go out and pay more for a child
Yeah.
elsewhere.
I just want to get back to that kidney issue, because it's my understanding if you need a kidney transplant, you have to get on a list. You can't put an ad in the Boston Globe, I'm willing to pay $50,000 or $100,000 for your kidney, please come and get tested until I find the right
You can-
the donor. I don't think
Well-
you can do that, but I'm asking if really, maybe you just
I don't think there is a
know.
law, that
and-
law does not mean that you can't sell your eggs, that you may be that you can't sell your kidney, because we have a process. What would I do with a kidney unless I went to the hospital and had that? I mean, it's not like you can do that. This is a
So you
little
think different body parts are gonna be treated by the law differently?
No, but I think eggs may be treated differently than body parts. I'm not trying to tell you that you can go and buy a heart, but you can't buy a liver. I'm telling you that the eggs, it isn't clear. That's why we put it into the statute, so we could clarify it for that reason.
I just wanna say, I agree with you, I think it should just be expenses.
I think so, yes. Now, the governor, when he vetoed the bill, incidentally, he tried to change the language on what you could get paid, and he put in the words out-of-pocket expenses. And I was furious. I changed that, got rid of the word out-of-pocket, because I thought that was an awful thing to do, because women could have missed work, they could have had to have there were other legitimate expenses that they could incur that they should be reimbursed for. So I didn't think out of pocket, but I certainly didn't think they should have enough money to do, to be like working. Yes, sir.
There's another aspect of this that I wondered whether you considered. I teach at Brandeis, teach reproductive biology at Brandeis, and roughly once a year, if not more, the Brandeis student paper runs ads for Jewish eggs, and big bucks are offered to Brandeis undergraduates to donate their Jewish eggs, and which raises.
I wish I had known that one.
But and the naivete of the undergraduate women is.
Well, that's why I said the age.
Exceeding, both in terms of the physiological and the psychological consequences of being an egg donor, particularly if you don't know what happened to that egg.
We also had the question, sorry to interrupt you, but if you paid women for eggs, would you have a disproportionate amount of eggs? I mean, would you have more eggs from young people that didn't know, or more eggs from people that didn't have money because they were doing it to get paid? Would you have the same kind of a cross-section?
But the issue that I'm raising is really the issue of religion or racism that is implicit in this, that if you start paying for an egg of a certain category, a Jewish egg or a Muslim egg or a Christian egg or what have you, you are in effect legislating a racial or religious definition of genetics, which seems to me very, very troubling.
I think so, but this was referring to eggs that were going to be used ultimately for stem cell, not for reproduction. So you could have the same issue as eggs that would be donated for fertility purposes. These were eggs, but it's the same issue of not having a clear cross-section. I agree with the issue.
Really in the stem cell world, because you're going to use them for potentially generating tissues and transplanting those tissues, and those tissues will have genetic properties that are not compatible between donor and recipient. So I think you don't get out of it that way.
That's another good reason to not do that. I agree. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yes. As you know, in the United States Senate, there's, I think, 7 pending bills to do with all of this. And some of them, which are very negative, they chop down this sort of work altogether if they got passed. There are 7 or 8 states now having these initiatives, like California, New Jersey, and now Massachusetts. Can the state bills be overruled by an overall Senate bill from the US government?
Well, there was that talk that the federal government would go so far as to outlaw it everywhere. That hasn't happened yet, which is interesting, which makes you realize that even President Bush understands that that may not ultimately be the right thing to do. That would be the ultimate, what they would call the ultimate trump card.
Yes.
But would it automatically override, or would that just become a
It's a
court
federal
fight?
law.
Oh, a
It's
federal.
law.
If in fact the federal statute went so far as to say affirmatively that it would preempt state legislation, it would in fact trump the state legislation. It's a matter where the federal government can regulate an industry or regulate an area and affirmatively tell the states that you no longer have a place within it.
Change the administration.
The reason I raised this question is before the Supreme Court there's been a discussion about the Oregon bill on assisted death.
Mhm.
And the
Okay,
new
Supreme Court's another problem.
the new Supreme Court Justice, in some interview I heard, was sort of taking the view that federal laws in general override state laws, and there's no exception. That's why I asked the
I
question.
think it could
Yes.
override.
It's
You
possible.
could do that.
I think his might be more of a minority position at this point, but
Yeah.
the way the trends have gone.
But it is the issue of whether there would be some federal prohibition on assisted suicide. And that would trump, again, what they were doing elsewhere. Okay?
Okay,
Good,
thank you very
thanks.
much.